The Vampire King left a $0 tip, but the waitress found a hidden note under the plate. "We don't serve your kind here," the old man behind the counter muttered, eyes fixed on the grimy linoleum, refusing to look up. "And what kind is that?" the stranger asked. His voice was not loud, yet it drowned out the rattle of the rain against the diner glass and the hiss of the espresso machine. It was a voice like velvet dragged over gravel, luxurious, ruined. "The hopeless," the old man replied, finally looking up. The stranger smiled, an expression devoid of mirth but heavy with irony. "Then I am in the right place, for I have no hope left to sell and none left to buy." He slid onto the stool, the wet fabric of his trench coat making no sound. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at the girl standing in the shadows of the kitchen doorway. Just coffee. Black as the sins we pretend to forget. The neon sign of the midnight griddle buzzed with the rhythmic spasm of a dying insect, casting a flickering, sickly red light over the wet pavement of 4th Street. It was a heartbeat of electricity in a city that had long since flatlined. Inside, the air was thick, a suspension of stale grease, lemon polish, and the damp wool of the late-shift regulars, a sensory cocktail of exhaustion. Isoria leaned against the service counter, her apron stained with the ghosts of 100 shifts, coffee splashes like old maps, ketchup smears like fresh wounds. She wasn't beautiful in the way the city liked. She was sharp angles and exhausted eyes, a portrait of survival painted in shades of grey. Her hair, a dark tangle pulled back in a utilitarian clip, had escaped in wisps that framed a face hardened by 24 years of low expectations. She watched the stranger at table 4. He had been there for an hour. He hadn't touched his phone. He hadn't opened a book. He sat with a stillness that was unnatural, like a statue carved from midnight and regret. His suit was expensive, bespoke charcoal wool that seemed to absorb the diner's harsh fluorescent lighting, but the cuffs were frayed and the collar was turned up against a chill that didn't exist inside. This was Fergus Whitland. Isoria didn't know the name yet, nor the titles that trailed behind him like a bloody cape. King of the Ashen Court, the last century of the void, the drinker of sorrow. To her, he was just another insomniac with a face that looked like it had seen empires rise and crumble into dust. "Refill?" Isoria asked, approaching the table with the pot of decaf. Her voice was flat, the armor of a woman who had learned that kindness was often mistaken for weakness. The pot felt heavy in her hand, a pendulum of hot liquid. Fergus looked up. His eyes were arresting, pale, crystalline blue, shattered by red veins of exhaustion. They were old eyes, ancient. They held the weight of glaciers grinding down mountains. "No," he said softly. "I think I have had my fill of this world tonight." "Check then, please." Isoria tore the slip from her pad and placed it face down on the Formica table. $8.50, a cheap price for an hour of shelter from the storm. She watched as he reached into his jacket. His hands were pale, the fingers long and elegant, spider-like in their grace, but they trembled slightly, a tremor of restraint, not weakness. He pulled out a bill, crisp and foreign-looking, before it seemed to shimmer and morph under the diner lights into a standard $10 bill. He placed it on the check. Then he stood up. He towered over her, easily 6'4", but he didn't loom. He felt hollowed out, a skyscraper gutted by fire, standing only by the memory of structure. He looked at Isoria, really looked at her, scanning her face as if searching for a specific crack in a porcelain vase. "You have a strong spine, Isoria," he said. He read her name tag, but it sounded like he was reading the genetic code written in her marrow. "It is a terrible burden to carry the weight of your own life. It is fatal to carry the weight of another's." "I manage," she said, unnerved. She took a half step back, her instinct flaring. "I'm sure you do." He buttoned his coat. The air around him smelled of ozone and petrichor, the scent of a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. "The bill is paid. But the service requires a different kind of currency." He turned and walked out. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, ignorant sound that clashed with the gravity of his departure. Isoria watched him vanish into the rain, swallowed by the night, as if he had never existed. She sighed, the tension in her shoulders refusing to release. She picked up the check holder. She opened it to collect the cash and see the tip. $10. The bill was $8.50. Change, $1.50. Tip line, a single, sharp strike-through. A zero. Isoria felt the familiar burn of indignation in her chest. A stiffed tip wasn't new. It was practically a ritual on the night shift, but the man had worn a suit worth more than her car. It was the arrogance of it that stung. The rich didn't pay because they thought the world owed them the space they occupied. "Typical," she muttered, reaching to snatch the $10 bill to shove it into the register. But as she lifted the black plastic folder, something fluttered to the floor. It wasn't money. It was a napkin, folded into a complex origami crane. But the paper was heavy, textured like parchment, and it didn't flutter like a napkin. It fell with the weight of a stone. Frowning, Isoria bent down and picked it up. She unfolded it. It wasn't a standard diner napkin. It was a thick, cream-colored bond paper, warm to the touch, pulsing faintly against her fingertips. Written in ink that shimmered with the iridescence of dried blood was a single line of elegant, archaic script, and below it a sequence of numbers. "For the debt I cannot pay, take the burden I cannot keep. Do not spend it. Become it." Below the cryptic message were coordinates, latitude and longitude. Isoria stared at the paper. The ink seemed to move, swirling like oil on water. The indignation vanished, replaced by a cold, sliding sensation in her gut, the primal instinct of a prey animal realizing the grass it's standing on is actually a trap. The diner noises faded into a dull roar, as if she were suddenly underwater. "Hey, Isoria!" Hadley Greymore, the night manager, shouted from the back office, his voice piercing the bubble. "Register count, now, and stop daydreaming." Isoria shoved the note into her apron pocket. It felt heavy against her hip, heavier than paper had any right to be. It felt like she had just pocketed a handgun. As she walked toward the register, the diner lights flickered violently. For a split second, the reflection in the window wasn't the diner. It was a throne room of obsidian and ash, vast and cold, and the person standing in Isoria's reflection wore a crown of thorns that wept black oil. She blinked, gasping, and the image was gone. Just the rain, just the night, and the $0 tip that was about to cost her everything. The coordinates pointed to the industrial district, a skeletal graveyard of brick factories and rusted water towers that the city's gentrification efforts had choked on and abandoned. Isoria sat in her rusted Honda Civic, the engine idling rough, coughing smoke into the damp air. It was 3 a.m. Her shift had ended an hour ago. Common sense screamed at her, a shrill, panicked voice in the back of her mind, to go home to her studio apartment, heat up some instant noodles, and sleep until noon. But the note in her pocket was hot, physically hot. It radiated a dull warmth that had seeped through her jeans and into her skin, a persistent, throbbing reminder. It hummed against her thigh bone, a vibration that matched her own pulse. "Become it." "This is stupid," she told the dashboard. "This is how people die in podcasts." She turned the engine off. The silence of the district was heavy, pressed down by the low-hanging clouds. The streetlights here were broken, their necks bent at unnatural angles. She grabbed her flashlight from the glove box, heavy, metal, a weapon if need be, and stepped out. The rain had reduced to a freezing mist that clung to her eyelashes. Isoria followed the GPS on her cracked phone screen. It led her past the condemned textile mill, its windows like empty eye sockets, down an alleyway choked with wet cardboard and broken glass that crunched ominously under her boots. She stopped at a solid steel door set into the side of a substation. There was no handle, no keyhole, no keypad, just a smooth, grey surface that seemed to absorb the beam of her flashlight. "Great," she whispered, her breath plumbing white. "A wall. He tipped me a wall." She turned to leave, feeling foolish. This was a prank, a rich guy's idea of a scavenger hunt for the poor girl. A sick joke to see how far she'd jump for a promise of something more. But as she turned, the note in her pocket flared with heat, stinging her thigh like a wasp sting. She gasped, slapping her leg, and pulled it out. The ink was moving. The letters twisted, reshaping themselves, crawling across the page like living spiders. "Press your hand against the iron. Blood knows its own." Isoria stared at the paper. Blood knows its own? What kind of goth poetry is this? She looked at the door. She looked at her hand. She felt ridiculous, but she also felt pulled. A magnetic resonance in her sternum, vibrating towards that steel door. It was a sensation of belonging, terrifying and alien. She reached out and placed her palm flat against the cold metal. A sharp prick. "Ow!" Isoria jerked her hand back. A single drop of bright red blood welled on her index finger. The door hadn't just touched her, it had tasted her. A deep, grinding sound resonated from within the building, like the gears of a clock the size of a mountain turning for the first time in centuries. The ground beneath her feet trembled. The steel door didn't open, it dissolved. The metal seemed to liquefy, retreating into the brickwork like silver mercury, revealing a dark corridor lit by strips of bioluminescent moss running along the ceiling. Isoria froze. This wasn't technology. This wasn't a prank. "You are late," a voice said from the darkness. Isoria aimed her flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom and landed on a woman leaning against the corridor wall. She was stunning and terrifying. She wore a business suit cut from silk that shimmered like oil, tailored to perfection. Her skin was the color of moonlight, and her hair was a cascading waterfall of silver. But it was her eyes that made Isoria's breath hitch. They were solid black, no iris, no sclera, just the void. This was Zeradin. "I didn't know I had an appointment," Isoria said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice, though her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Zeradin pushed off the wall and walked into the light. She moved with a predatory grace, silent and fluid, her feet making no sound on the stone floor. "The king does not give invitations, child. He gives commands disguised as choices. You accepted the note. You accepted the inheritance." "I accepted a piece of paper because he stiffed me on the tip," Isoria snapped, stepping back, gripping the flashlight like a club. "I'm looking for an explanation, not a job." Zeradin laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of ice. Beautiful, brittle and cold. "He left you a zero, yes? The circle, the symbol of the cycle, the Ouroboros. He didn't leave you nothing, Isoria. He left you the crown." Isoria stared at her. "You're insane. He was just a guy in a wet coat." "He was Fergus Whitland," Zeradin corrected, her amusement fading into a sharp, dangerous seriousness. Her black eyes narrowed. "And by passing the writ of succession to you, a mortal, a nobody, a waitress, he has broken the Treaty of Smoke." Zeradin stepped closer. Isoria could smell her, lilacs and formaldehyde. "He has abdicated, and he has named you the regent of the Ashen Court. I don't want it, Isoria said, backing up until her heel hit a loose cobblestone. Take it back. Here. She thrust the note out. Zeradine recoiled as if Isoria had brandished a flamethrower. Do not wave that at me. The magic is bound to the bearer now. If I touch it, I burn. If I kill you— Zeradine tilted her head, considering it with the dispassionate curiosity of a butcher eyeing a cut of meat. If I kill you, the power dissipates, and the court falls into civil war. Garin would like that. But I prefer order. Who is Garin? Someone who is currently tracking the scent of your blood from the door mechanism, Zeradine said calmly. He will be here in approximately 3 minutes. He will not offer you an explanation. He will tear your throat out to see if the crown falls out with your trachea. Isoria's stomach dropped. Is this a joke? Garin Winterhold has wanted the throne for 600 years, Zeradine said, checking a watch that seemed to have planets instead of numbers orbiting a central sun. He is likely parking his car right now. I suggest you come inside, Regent. The waitress shift is over. Isoria looked back at the alleyway. It was empty, but the shadows seemed to be stretching, reaching for her, elongating into claws. She looked at Zeradine, the monster in the Versace suit. Run or rule, Zeradine whispered. Those are the only choices Fergus left you. A car door slammed in the distance. Heavy footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, fast and purposeful, splashing through puddles. Isoria cursed, a sharp, ugly sound. She gripped her flashlight, took a breath of the damp, rot-scented air, and stepped across the threshold into the dark. The interior was not a warehouse. It was a physics-defying cathedral of glass and steel, buried underground. The architecture was impossible. Arches that twisted like DNA strands, staircases that spiraled into abysses without railings, and walls lined with millions of books, scrolls, and vials that glowed with inner light. Isoria followed Zeradine, trying to keep up with the woman's brisk pace. Her mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the grime of the alley with the majesty of this subterranean palace. Where is he? Fergus, Isoria demanded, her voice echoing in the vast space. Gone, Zeradine said, not looking back. Her heels clicked sharply on the glass floor, beneath which dark water churned. To the sun, perhaps, or the bottom of the ocean. He has been seeking the final death for a century. Passing the burden was the only key to the exit. So he dumped his problems on me and killed himself? Isoria asked, outrage warring with awe as they passed a massive, cylindrical tank filled with jellyfish that glowed with human faces, their mouths moving in silent screams. Essentially, it was a very human thing to do. He admired your species for your selfishness. He called it survival instinct. They arrived at a central rotunda. In the center stood a desk made of petrified wood, ancient and scarred, and behind it a high-backed chair that looked suspiciously like a throne, stripped of its ornamentation. Sitting on the desk was a woman with hair like fire, red, wild, and moving as if in a breeze that didn't exist. Her eyes were gold, slit-pupilled like a cat's. This was Belvania. She was shuffling a deck of tarot cards that were blank until she touched them, at which point images flared and vanished. She's young, Belvania noted, not looking up, and she smells of cheap coffee and anxiety. She is the regent, Zeradine said, stopping. Adeliza is securing the perimeter against Garin. We have maybe an hour before the wards fail. Belvania looked up, her gaze piercing Isoria like a skewer. Let me see the note. Isoria hesitated, then held it out. She didn't let go. Belvania peered at the shimmering ink. The royal seal, a binding contract. He really did it. The absolute bastard. She looked at Isoria with a mixture of pity and hunger. Do you know what you are now, girl? In over my head? You are a battery, Belvania said bluntly. The Vampire King is not just a ruler. He is the anchor of the energetic ley lines that keep the hidden world from colliding with the human one. Fergus was old. He could hold the energy. You? She clicked her tongue. You will burn out in a week unless we anchor you. Anchor me to what? To the court. To us. Belvania stood up. She was shorter than Zeradin, but radiated a denser power, like a collapsed star. You have to claim the throne, Isoria, formally. If you don't, the magic Fergus dumped into you will eat your nervous system. You'll die screaming, and you'll take half the city with you. Isoria laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. This is insane. I serve pancakes. I check expiration dates. I don't rule vampires. You do now, a new voice boomed. The air in the room dropped 20 degrees instantly. Frost bloomed on the glass floor. From the shadows of the upper balcony, a figure leaped down, falling 50 feet and landing silently despite his massive size. He was clad in tactical gear, not suits or robes, black Kevlar, straps, and buckles. He carried a sword that looked like it was forged from jagged ice, mist curling off the blade. Garin Winterhold. He didn't look like a sophisticated aristocrat. He looked like a soldier who enjoyed his work too much. His face was a map of scars, and his eyes were yellow, burning with a furious, feral intelligence. Garin, Zeradin said, stepping in front of Isoria. You are trespassing in the sanctum. The king is dead, Garin snarled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Isoria's teeth. There is no sanctum. There is only the succession, and I do not see a king. I see a human meal. He walked forward, the ice on his sword crackling. Give me the writ, girl, and I will make your death instant. Keep it, and I will spend a decade peeling the skin from your bones to find where the magic hides. Isoria looked at the sword. She looked at Zeradin and Belvania, who were tense, readying magic that made the air crackle with static. She looked at the note in her hand. Take the burden I cannot keep. Fear, cold and paralyzing, washed over her. But beneath the fear, there was anger, a hot, bright ember of rage. Fergus had used her. Garin wanted to kill her. Zeradin wanted to use her. She was tired of being used. She was tired of people deciding her value based on her uniform. Isoria squeezed the note. The paper dissolved into golden dust, soaking into her skin, burning like liquid gold entering her bloodstream. Garin roared, lunging forward. He moved faster than thought, a blur of violence. No! Zeradin screamed, throwing up a shield of darkness that shattered under Garin's blade like sugar glass. Isoria didn't run. She didn't know why, but she didn't run. The golden heat in her blood surged, seeking an outlet. She raised her hand, the one that had absorbed the note, and shouted, "Sit down!" It was a Waitress command, the tone she used on drunk patrons trying to grab her waist. Sharp, authoritative, final. A shockwave of violet energy exploded from her palm. It wasn't just force, it was authority. It hit Garin in the chest like a freight train. The massive vampire was lifted off his feet and hurled backward, smashing into the stone pillar with a bone-shattering crunch. The sword clattered to the floor, sliding away. Silence descended on the room. Dust motes danced in the violet light that was now fading from Isoria's hand. Garin groaned, trying to rise, but an invisible weight pinned him to the floor. The command was absolute. Isoria stared at her hand. Smoke was rising from her fingertips. She looked at Garin, pinned by her will alone. She looked at Zeradin, whose mouth was slightly open in shock. He didn't leave a tip, Isoria whispered, the reality crashing down on her. He left me the gun. She looked at the vampires. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard clarity, the kind you get at 4 a.m. when the rush is over and the cleanup begins. My shift isn't over, Isoria said, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. She rolled up her sleeves. I think I'm just getting started. Now someone explain to me how I turn this off before I accidentally blow up the city. Garin spat blood on the floor and looked at her with a new emotion. Not hunger. Fear. The game had changed. The waitress held the check, and everyone was about to pay. The silence following the crash was heavy, textured like wet wool. Garin Winterhold, the scourge of the northern wastes, the breaker of the Iron Treaty, lay groaning amidst the rubble of a 1,000-year-old pillar. He wasn't dead. Immortals were frustratingly durable. But his pride had been shattered into more pieces than the masonry. Isoria lowered her hand. The violet light flickered and died, leaving her palm stinging, as if she had slapped a block of dry ice. "Adeliza!" Zeradine barked, her composure snapping back into place like a whip. "Secure the traitor. Use the adamant chains. If he twitches, burn him." From the shadows of the upper gantry, a blur of motion descended. Adeliza landed in a crouch between Isoria and Garin. She was different from the others, smaller, compact, wearing modern streetwear that looked like it had been reinforced with Kevlar and runes. She held dual batons that hummed with a low, nauseating frequency. "On it," Adeliza said, her voice a smoker's rasp. She kicked Garin in the ribs, flipping him over. "Morning sunshine. You have the right to remain silent, but I really hope you don't." As Adeliza dragged the cursing warlord away, Isoria felt the adrenaline drain out of her, replaced by a fatigue so profound it felt like her bones were turning to lead. She staggered. Belvania was there instantly, catching her. The woman smelled of ozone and ancient paper. "Breathe, Regent. You just channeled the Lacor without a conduit. Your nervous system is currently trying to decide if it should shut down or explode." I told him to sit, Isoria mumbled, her tongue feeling thick, and he sat. "You used the voice," Zeradine said, approaching them. She looked at Isoria, not with the disdain of a customer, but with the terrifying calculation of a scientist examining a new, volatile element. Fergus never used the voice. He considered it vulgar, a blunt instrument. "It worked," Isoria managed, righting herself. She pushed Belvania away gently. "Now, I want answers. Real ones. Not riddles about circles and snakes." Zeradine sighed, smoothing the silk of her suit. "Come. The throne room is not the place for tutorials." They led her to a side chamber, a space that looked less like a dungeon and more like a high-end penthouse, albeit one buried 100 feet underground. Zeradine poured a glass of amber liquid and shoved it into Isoria's hand. "Drink. It's brandy, not blood. We aren't savages." Isoria drank. It burned, grounding her. "Okay, talk." "Fergus Whitland was the king of the Ashen Court," Zeradine began, pacing. "Vampires, as you call us, are not merely biological predators. We are energetic parasites. We feed on essence, on life force. Without a king to filter the ambient energy of the void, we would devour this city in a night. We would lose our minds to the hunger." "So Fergus was a filter?" "A dam," Belvania corrected, shuffling her blank tarot cards. "He held the madness back. He absorbed the excess entropy so the rest of us could play at being civilized. But the dam cracks, Isoria. Over centuries, the sorrow, the pain, the sheer weight of existing, it breaks you. So he quit," Isoria said bitterly. "And he gave the job to me. A human, that's like handing a nuclear reactor to a toddler." "He didn't choose a human at random," Zeradine said softly. She stopped pacing and looked Isoria in the eye. "He watched you for 6 months, Isoria." Isoria froze. "What?" "He sat in your diner. He watched you handle the drunks, the thieves, the heartbroken and the hopeless. He watched you work double shifts to pay for your mother's hospice care before she passed. He saw you take the abuse of the world and refuse to let it turn you cruel. Zeradine reached out, almost touching Isoria's face, then pulled back. The crown requires a strong spine, he said. But more than that, it requires a heart that understands the value of service. A king does not rule, Isoria. A king serves. And you have been serving your whole life. Isoria looked down at the empty brandy glass. The anger was still there, but it was complicated now. So I'm stuck with this? The magic? The target on my back? Until you die or pass it on, Belvanir said cheerfully, which, given Garen's faction, could be Tuesday. Isoria set the glass down. The trembling in her hands had stopped. She thought of the 0 on the tip line, the insult, the challenge. Become it. Fine, Isoria said, standing up. If I'm the king, or queen, or regent, whatever, then things are going to change. First rule, no one eats the staff. Second rule, I need a shower. Third rule, I want to see the books. Zeradine blinked. The books? The ledger, the accounts. Who owes us? Who we owe? Where the money comes from? If I'm running this business, I want to know if we're in the black or the red. Zeradine stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It was sharp, dangerous, and genuinely impressed. Adeliza, Zeradine called out. Get the regent a change of clothes, and bring the ledger, the big one. 3 days later, Isoria walked into the great hall of the Ashen Court. She was not wearing the silk gowns Zeradine had suggested. She wore a tailored black suit, sharp and modern, with a high collar that concealed the pulsing vein in her neck. On her feet were combat boots, polished to a mirror shine. She felt ridiculous, terrified, and strangely powerful. The hall was filled with them, the night folk. They weren't all beautiful. Some were monstrous, hulking shapes in the shadows. Some were painfully thin, ethereal wisps of smoke and bone. There were hundreds of them, the aristocracy of the dark, waiting to see the human who had stolen their crown. Isoria walked to the dais. She refused to sit on the throne. It was too big, too pretentious. Instead, she stood in front of it, hands clasped behind her back, exactly as she used to stand when waiting for a difficult table to clear out. They smell your fear, Adeliza whispered from her left. The warden was in full armor now, her batons glowing faintly. Try to smell like disappointment instead. They hate that. Isoria scanned the crowd. She saw sneers. She saw hunger. She saw curiosity. I am Isoria, she said. Her voice didn't boom, but the acoustics of the room, or the magic in her blood, carried it to the furthest corner. I am the holder of the writ. I am the regent. You are meat, a voice cried out. A glass shattered. From the crowd emerged a man, elegant and wasted, wearing velvet from a century that had died screaming. You are a temporary embarrassment. Where is Garen? Where is the strength? Garen is currently guests of the state in the lower cells, Isoria said calmly, because he forgot his manners. Do you wish to join him? The vampire hissed, baring fangs that were needle-thin. I challenge you. By the right of blood and ash, I challenge your claim. A human cannot hold the core. You will burn out before the moon sets. He lunged. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a psychic scream. Isoria felt it hit her mind like a physical blow. A wave of pure, distilled despair. Images flashed before her eyes. Her mother dying in the hospital bed, the eviction notices, the nights she cried herself to sleep from exhaustion, the customers who treated her like furniture. The vampire was trying to drown her in her own trauma. He was feeding on her shame. Isoria staggered, one knee hitting the stone floor. The court gasped. The vampire laughed, drawing closer, sucking the air out of the room. Give up, the voice whispered in her head. You are nothing, a waitress, a servant. You are dirt. Isoria gritted her teeth. She knew this feeling. She felt it every time a manager screamed at her for a mistake she didn't make. She felt it every time a customer snapped their fingers at her. She knew how to swallow it, and she knew what to do with it. She didn't fight the despair. She accepted it. She took the tray of garbage he was handing her, balanced it, and then she flipped the table. Isoria looked up. Her eyes were not human brown anymore. They were glowing with a cold, violet light. Is that all? She asked. The vampire froze. I have survived poverty, Isoria said, standing up. The air around her began to vibrate. I have survived grief. I have survived a world that wanted me to be invisible. Your little nightmare? It's a Tuesday afternoon shift compared to my life. She reached out with her mind, grabbed the psychic link he had established, and pulled. She didn't attack him. She just showed him the bill. She projected the sheer, grinding exhaustion of being human back at him. The weight of mortality, the fear of aging, the struggle to survive on minimum wage. The vampire screamed. He clutched his head, falling to his knees. He had lived for centuries in luxury. He had no defense against the raw, gritty reality of human survival. Table for one, Isoria said cold. You're done. The vampire collapsed, unconscious, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of a human life. Silence reigned in the hall. Absolute, terrified silence. Isoria smoothed her jacket. She looked at the crowd. Anyone else want to complain about the service? No one moved. Then, slowly, Zeradine began to clap. A slow, rhythmic applause. Belvania joined in. Then Adeliza. And soon, the entire hall was filling with the sound of applause. Not out of love, but out of respect for the predator who had just eaten one of their own without baring a single fang. As Isoria turned to leave the dais, she felt a sharp pain in her pocket. She reached in and pulled out a piece of paper. It wasn't the original note. It was new. It was written on the back of a midnight griddle receipt. The first test is survival. The second is memory. Don't look at the reflection in the mirror, Isoria. Look at what's behind the glass. She looked around. There was no one near her who could have slipped it into her pocket. Fergus was watching, or someone pretending to be him. The victory at the court felt hollow the moment Isoria stepped back onto the rainy street. It was 2 a.m. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the tip. She had spent every waking hour in the underground, learning history, magic theory, and combat drills that left her bruised and battered. She needed to see the real world. She needed to smell coffee that didn't cost $50 a cup. She parked the Civic. She refused to take the black sedan Zeradine offered, a block away from the midnight griddle. The neon sign was still flickering. The E in griddle was out. She walked to the window. It was busy for a Tuesday. Hadley was behind the counter, looking harried. A new girl was working Isoria's section, young, blonde, looking terrified as she balanced 3 plates of eggs. Isoria felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it stole her breath. That was her misery. That was her station. She pushed the door open. The bell chimed. Hadley looked up. His face went slack. Isoria, Jesus, yes, where have you been? I thought you were dead. I filed a missing persons report. I'm okay, Hadley, she said, sliding onto a stool. It felt wrong. The vinyl felt too cold. I had a family emergency, out of state. You could have called, Hadley said, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at her suit, the quality of the fabric, the way she held herself. You look different. You win the lottery. Something like that. Well, you're fired, obviously, Hadley said, though his voice lacked heat. But I'm glad you're not in a ditch. Coffee. Please. He poured it. She lifted the mug. It smelled like home. But as she brought it to her lips, she stopped. The steam rising from the cup wasn't just steam. It was curling into shapes. Tiny, screaming faces. Isoria blinked. She looked around the diner. The glamour she had lived under her whole life had been stripped away by the Regent's power. The man in the corner booth wasn't eating toast. He was gnawing on a bone that looked disturbingly human. The old woman by the window didn't have a cat carrier. She had a cage containing a small, glowing sprite that was frantically banging against the bars. And the old man, the owner, Mr. Henderson, who sat by the register and never spoke, was staring right at her. But he wasn't an old man. Through her new eyes, she saw him clearly. He was a construct of clockwork and dried skin, a watcher golem, and inside his chest a red light was blinking, transmitting. "Isoria?" Hadley asked. "You okay?" "Hadley," Isoria said, her voice low. "How long has Mr. Henderson owned this place?" "Since forever, since the 50s. Why?" "Get out," she whispered. "What?" "Get the new girl. Get out. Go to the back. Now." "Isoria, you're scaring me. Go." She slammed her hand on the counter. The shockwave rattled the cups. Hadley jumped, eyes wide, and backed away, signaling the new girl. "Mister." Henderson stood up. The skin of his face split, revealing the brass gears underneath. "Regent," the machine spoke, its voice a grinding of metal on metal. "Target acquired. The Winterhold faction sends its regards." The golem's chest opened. It wasn't a bomb. It was a portal. From the mechanical cavity in the old man's chest, a swarm of black, insectoid creatures poured out, chittering and shrieking. They weren't bugs. They were void mites, eaters of magic. Isoria didn't have her sword. She didn't have her guards. She had a mug of hot coffee and a very bad attitude. "I am really starting to hate this job," she muttered. She threw the coffee. Not at the bugs, but at the sprinkler system sensor on the ceiling. The scalding liquid hit the sensor. The alarm blared. The sprinklers exploded into life, showering the diner in water. Water. The universal solvent. Isoria concentrated, pulling on the latent energy of the water. "Freeze," she commanded. The water in the air turned into thousands of jagged ice shards. With a sweep of her arm, she directed the storm of needles at the swarm. The void mites were shredded, dissolving into black smoke. The golem lurched toward her, heavy brass arms swinging. Isoria ducked, sliding over the counter, a move she had practiced 1,000 times to grab an order, now used to save her life. She grabbed the industrial spatula from the grill. "Order up!" she yelled, and jammed the metal handle into the gears of the golem's neck. Sparks flew. The golem thrashed, the spatula jamming its primary drive. It collapsed, twitching, onto the linoleum. Isoria stood there, panting, soaked to the bone. The diner was a wreck. Hadley was peeking out from the kitchen, pale as a sheet. What are you?" he stammered. Isoria looked at him. She looked at the destroyed diner. She looked at the reflection in the window, wet hair, wild eyes, power crackling around her fingers. She couldn't go back. The line had been crossed. The midnight griddle was just a memory now. "I'm the manager," she said sadly. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with a shaking hand, a text message, unknown number. "You survived the night. Now survive the day. The king is not dead, Isoria. He is waiting." Isoria stared at the screen. Fergus, he wasn't dead. He was watching, and he had just used her as bait to draw out the Winterhold spies. She gripped the phone until the screen cracked. "Okay, Fergus," she whispered to the rain. "You want to play games? Let's play." She turned to Hadley. "Put it on my tab." And she walked out into the storm, leaving the human world behind forever. The coordinates hidden in the text message didn't lead to a dungeon or a graveyard. They led to the roof of the Zenith Tower, the highest point in the city, a needle of glass piercing the smog to touch the indifferent stars. Isoria stepped out of the maintenance elevator. The wind here was savage, screaming against the structural supports, but she didn't shiver. The magic of the core hummed in her veins, a second cardiovascular system of liquid fire. He was there. Fergus Whitland stood at the very edge of the parapet, his coat whipping violently around him. He wasn't looking at the city lights below, the glittering grid of human lives he had abandoned. He was looking up into the black abyss of the sky. "You took your time," Fergus said. His voice didn't fight the wind. It cut through it, clear and resonant. "I had a mess to clean up," Isoria replied, walking toward him. Her boots crunched on the gravel roof. "You left your dirty dishes in the sink, Fergus. The Winterhold faction, the golems, the void mites." Fergus turned. He looked ruinous. The elegant exhaustion she had seen in the diner had deepened into a spectral gauntness. His skin was translucent, mapping blue veins like rivers on a drought-stricken map. He looked like a man who had been bleeding out for 1,000 years. "I left you the tools to clean them," he said, "and you did. Zeradine tells me you govern with the ruthlessness of a storm front. They call you the Iron Waitress." "Stop with the metaphors," Isoria snapped. She stopped 10 feet from him. "Why are you here? You abdicated. You gave me the writ. You're supposed to be dead or drinking margaritas in the underworld." "I tried to die," Fergus admitted, a faint, bitter smile touching his lips. "But the crown, it clings. It has a memory. It wouldn't let me fade until the successor was fully initialized, until you accepted the nature of the beast." "I accepted it," Isoria said. "I'm the regent. Now step away from the ledge. Step." "You are not the regent," Fergus whispered. "You are the sacrifice." The air pressure dropped. The sky above the tower began to swirl, the clouds twisting into a funnel shape. The center was not dark. It was a blinding, absolute absence of light. A zero. "The void isn't just a concept, Isoria," Fergus shouted over the rising wind. "It's a creditor, and the bill is due. The king doesn't rule the vampires. The king is the meal that keeps the void from eating everything else. I passed the writ to you, not to save the kingdom, but to feed the beast a fresh soul, so it wouldn't take the world." Isoria stared at him. The betrayal was cold and absolute. "You tipped me to die?" "I tipped you 0, Fergus roared, his eyes glowing white. "Because that is what we all return to. I am sorry, Isoria, but one life is cheaper than 1,000,000,000. He raised his hands. The funnel cloud descended, a tentacle of nothingness reaching for the tower. The void descended, a silent roar that muted the city below. Isoria stood her ground. She should have been terrified. She was a 24-year-old woman who, a month ago, worried about rent and expiration dates on milk. Now, she was staring at the heat death of the universe. But she wasn't scared. She was furious. "You think this is noble?" she yelled at Fergus. "Sacrificing the little guy to save the establishment? That's not kingship, Fergus. That's corporate bankruptcy." "It is necessity," Fergus countered. The void tendrils lashed out, striking the roof, disintegrating the concrete into dust. "Run, Isoria. Let it take me. If I die while you hold the writ, the debt transfers to you, but the immediate hunger is sated." "No!" Isoria didn't run. She didn't attack Fergus. She attacked the logic of the situation. She reached into the pocket of her soul, where the crown's power resided. It was a heavy, golden weight. She pulled it out, not physically but metaphysically. She held the burning concept of authority in her mind. "The king is the filter." "Wrong!" she growled. She stepped between Fergus and the descending void. "Isoria, move!" Fergus screamed. "I don't serve off the menu," she shouted at the sky. "And I don't pay bills I didn't sign for." She raised both hands. Instead of building a wall to block the void, or a weapon to fight it, she did something insane. She opened the door. She channeled the ley core, the entirety of the vampire nation's energy, and she inverted it. Instead of hoarding the energy to keep the vampires immortal, she pushed it out. She turned the Ashen Court from a battery into a prism. "What are you doing?" Zeradine's voice screamed over the comms in Isoria's earpiece. "The power levels are dropping. We're aging. You're draining us." "I'm paying the tab," Isoria yelled back. She fired a beam of pure, concentrated life force, stolen from the immortality of the vampires, straight into the void. It was a transaction. The void wanted energy? Fine. She would give it energy. But she wouldn't give it her soul. She would give it the accumulated excess of 10,000 years of vampiric gluttony. The beam hit the black funnel. The sky screamed, a sound like tearing metal. Fergus fell to his knees, clutching his chest. You're spending the inheritance. You'll bankrupt the court." "Good," Isoria laughed, wild and free. "It's time you bloodsuckers learned to budget." The void drank. It drank the stolen centuries of the vampires. It drank the darkness. And as it drank, the black funnel began to turn white, satiated. The silence that followed was not the silence of death. It was the silence of a clean slate. The sun was rising over the city, a real pale yellow sun, cutting through the smog. Isoria sat on the edge of the roof, her legs dangling over the abyss. Her suit was torn, her hair a mess, but she felt lighter than she had in her entire life. Beside her sat Fergus. He looked different. The spectral glow was gone. His skin was flush with colour, pink, human, fragile. He was breathing hard, shivering in the cold morning air. "I'm cold," he said, sounding amazed. "That's called weather," Isoria said, not looking at him. "You get used to it. What did you do?" "I renegotiated the contract," Isoria said, pulling a crumpled pack of cigarettes from her pocket, a habit she thought she'd quit. She lit one with a snap of her fingers, using a tiny spark of residual magic. "I fed the void, the immortality of the court. It's full. It's gone back to sleep for another millennium. And the court? Alive. But mortal, or semi-mortal. They'll age now, slowly. They'll have to ration the magic. No more gods, just people with sharp teeth and sunlight sensitivity." Fergus looked at his hands. "And me? You're fired," Isoria said simply. "As king, as sacrifice, you're done." I don't know how to be anything else." Isoria finally looked at him. The ancient misery was gone from his eyes, replaced by a terrifying, blank canvas. He was free, and freedom was the scariest thing in the world. "You'll figure it out," she said. She stood up and brushed the dust off her pants. "But first, you owe me." "I owe you my life?" "No," Isoria said, checking her watch. "You owe me $1.50, the change from the coffee, and a 20% tip. That comes to $3.50, Fergus." Fergus stared at her, and then, for the first time in 600 years, he laughed. It was a rusty, creaking sound, but it was real. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a platinum coin. "Will this cover it?" Isoria snatched the coin. "It's a start." She walked toward the elevator. "Where are you going?" he called out. "The throne awaits. You are the queen of a mortal court now." Isoria stopped. She looked back at the sunrise, then at the former king shivering in the wind. "I'm going to open the diner," she said. "The morning rush starts in an hour, and unlike you, I don't leave a mess for the next shift." She hit the button. The doors opened. "Coming?" she asked. Fergus Whitland, former king of the Ashen Court, stood up on shaky legs. He looked at the horizon, then at the waitress who had conquered the dark with a checkbook and a bad attitude. "Yes," he said. "I believe I could use a refill. The midnight griddle still stands on 4th Street. The neon sign still flickers, though the E has been fixed. To the casual observer, it's just a diner. The coffee is strong, the pancakes are fluffy, and the service is brisk. But if you look closely, you'll notice the regulars are odd. They wear sunglasses at night. They tip in gold coins, and they treat the woman behind the counter not with politeness, but with reverence. Isoria doesn't sit on a throne of bone. She stands behind a register of chrome. She rules not with fear, but with the absolute, terrifying fairness of someone who knows exactly what everything costs. And in the corner booth, wiping tables with the focus of a man learning a new art, is a tall man with silver hair. He isn't the king anymore. He's the bus boy, and for the first time in eternity, he is happy. Some crowns are made of gold, some are made of thorns, but the heaviest crown of all is the one you choose to wear. And sometimes, the only way to rule the world is to serve it. Did this story leave you hungry for more? If Isoria's journey from the counter to the crown resonated with you, don't forget to like this story and share it with your friends. Subscribe for more tales of urban fantasy, hidden worlds, and characters who refuse to play by the rules. What would you do if you found a magical note under your plate? Let me know in the comments below.